When I opened my eyes, the snow outside the window had been falling for 3 hours straight. The end of January in Chicago turned out to be so freezing that the cold pierced right to the bone. I was standing in the kitchen, making sweet hot cocoa for Sophie. My phone screen lit up. An iMessage from Victor. Important meeting with clients today. Don't wait up for dinner. For the 73rd time, I didn't reply. I lowered the heat and slowly stirred the thick, chocolatey drink with a spoon. Sophie was 3 years and 2 months old. She loved my hot cocoa and chased after me with her mug every time, shouting, "Mommy, sweetie." This was the 3rd year of my marriage to Victor. 3 years ago, I locked that micro-transmitter in the very bottom secret compartment of my jewelry box and told myself that Anastasia Sterling was dead. Only Anna, Victor's wife and Sophie's mother, was alive. My father had stayed silent on the phone for a long time back then. In the end, he uttered only one sentence. "Have you really thought this through?" I answered yes. But I didn't tell him that on that rainy evening in the city, when Victor opened his umbrella over me, my heart truly skipped a beat. A man who had absolutely nothing to do with my background. He fell in love with me not because my last name was Sterling, but because I handed him a hot cup of coffee. At least, that's what I thought back then. The cocoa was ready. I poured a little into a small mug, left it to cool, and went to Sophie's room. Opening the door, I saw that the room was empty. The blanket on her small bed was neatly folded, and Sophie's favorite plush bunny was lying crookedly near the pillow. "Sophie?" I called out. No one answered. The living room was empty. The bathroom was empty. The balcony, too. I rushed down the stairs, my slippers sliding on the marble steps. I slammed my knee against the corner of a step, feeling a dull ache, but didn't even grab the railing as I ran down to the first floor. "Martha, where's Sophie?" Martha, the nanny, peeked out of the laundry room, clutching Victor's shirt. "Chloe came by 2 hours ago. She said Victor told her to take Sophie out for a walk." Chloe's name pierced my temple like a fine needle. Victor's secretary. She'd been working for him for a year and a half. She was 24. Her makeup was always flawless. Every time she came to our house with reports, she looked at me like an old, out-of-style piece of furniture. "Where did she take her?" she said to them all. I dialed Chloe's number. The phone was off. I dialed Victor. It rang for a long time. On the 6th ring, he picked up. In the background, there was the roar of drunken revelry. Men's laughter and women's squeals merged into a continuous noise. "Victor, is Sophie with you?" "What?" He seemed not to hear, and only answered a couple of seconds later. "Oh, Chloe took her for a walk." "Why are you panicking? Where did she take her?" "There's a blizzard outside. Enough. Sophie isn't made of sugar. She won't melt. You're always on edge. Let me work with my clients in peace." The call dropped. I stood in the hallway, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The snow outside was intensifying, the streetlights shattering against the thick flakes. The thermometer read -4 degrees Fahrenheit. My 3-year-old daughter, wearing only her cotton pajamas, was taken away by a woman who was clearly having an affair with my husband, and she had taken her 2 hours ago. Her phone was off. I threw on my down parka, grabbed my car keys, and ran out into the street. The sound of tires crushing the snow sounded like snapping bones. With one hand, I steered the wheel. With the other, I continuously dialed numbers. Chloe was unreachable. Victor wasn't picking up. I opened the home security camera app on my phone. The footage showed Chloe in a red peacoat leading Sophie out by the hand. Sophie turned to the camera and smiled. She thought she was going out to play. First, I drove to the 3 nearest shopping malls. Play zones, kids' cafes, bakeries. I searched everywhere. No one had seen a woman in a red coat with a 3-year-old girl. The blizzard was getting worse. Ice formed on my eyelashes. By the 3rd hour of searching, my hands began to shake. And not from the cold, from fear. That thick, viscous fear that originates at the base of your spine and floods your throat. I forced myself to calm down and opened the GPS tracking app on my phone. Sophie's Apple Watch. I had bought her a smartwatch with a satellite tracker. The signal was jumping, but the last location was pinned at the Lincoln Park South Lagoon, 40 minutes ago. Lincoln Park Lagoon, end of January. A blizzard. I knew this place. In the summer, Sophie and I walked there. There was a large pond, and in the summer, water lilies bloomed, Sophie would point at the dragonflies and laugh, stomping her little feet. Now it was winter. The lagoon was covered in ice. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. When I pulled up to the park near the lagoon, there was only one car in the entire parking lot. Chloe's white Audi. The doors were unlocked, the cabin was empty. The heater was still running. On the dashboard, a missed call notification glowed on her phone screen. The contact was saved as Vic, with a little heart emoji next to it. I ran deep into the park. The snow was up to my ankles. There were no streetlights. I turned on my phone's flashlight, but the beam drowned in the chaotic whiteness of the blizzard. Sophie! My voice was torn apart by the wind. Sophie! No one answered. I ran toward the lagoon along the same path we walked in the summer. I fell twice. I leaned my palms against the snow. Shards of ice dug into my skin, but I felt no pain. Reaching the shore, I saw Chloe first. She was standing in a wooden gazebo, tightly bundled in her red coat, staring at her phone. Her fresh burgundy manicure gleamed in the light of the screen. Sophie was not with her. Where is Sophie? My own voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse, broken, like a rusty knife scraping against a steel pipe. Chloe looked up at me with annoyance, as if asking, "Why the hell are you here?" "Oh, she ran off somewhere to play. Kids, right? You can't keep track of them. She's 3 years old. It's below zero outside. You brought her here and let her run off to play by herself? I'm not your nanny." Chloe shoved her phone into her pocket and adjusted her scarf. Victor told me to take her out for some fresh air, not to hover over her every second. Besides, Anna, kids need to be toughened up. You coddle her too much. How is she ever going to adapt to the real world?" Saying this, she even smiled slightly from the corners of her mouth. I didn't bother answering her. I turned and threw myself into the snow. The lagoon. I needed to get to the ice. The last signal from Sophie came from the direction of the water. The frozen lagoon reflected a dull blue light in the darkness. I fell to my knees and pressed my ear to the ice. I couldn't hear anything, only the roar of the wind and the pounding of my own heart. And then I saw it. Closer to the center of the lagoon, a black hole gaped in the ice. Small, but large enough for a 3-year-old child to fall through. The edges of the ice hole showed signs of broken ice, as if someone had been desperately thrashing about. My mind shut down for a second. Then I stood up, threw off my parka, and stepped onto the ice. The ice cracked quietly beneath my feet. Every step felt like walking on glass. I didn't dare to run. Crouching low to distribute my weight, I inched closer and closer to that black hole. 10 feet, 6 feet, 3. I lay down on the edge of the hole and looked down. The water was pitch black. I couldn't see anything. "Sophie." I plunged my arm into the water. The near-freezing lake water cut my skin like a razor. My fingers lost all feeling in 3 seconds. Clenching my teeth, I reached deeper. My elbow, my shoulder, half my torso went underwater. The tips of my fingers brushed against something soft. Fabric. Sophie's cotton pajamas. I grabbed the fabric and pulled upward. The water's resistance was monstrous. My shoulder nearly popped out of its socket. I bit my lower lip until it bled. My mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood. When I pulled her out, I saw my daughter's face. She was blue. Her lips were entirely white, her eyes closed. Her pajamas were soaked through and were already beginning to form a crust of ice. She was stiff, like a frozen porcelain doll. "Sophie. Sophie, look at Mommy. Mommy is here." I pressed her to me. Her body burned my chest with cold, like a block of ice. It felt like my heart was being crushed in a fist. She was still breathing, but very faintly. Her breath was as thin as a spider web. The air coming out of her nose didn't even form vapor in the freezing cold. I took off my sweater, wrapped her in it, and crawled toward the shore. The ice behind me cracked, water splashing out of the fissures, soaking my pants. I didn't dare stop. I crawled on all fours for the final stretch, slamming my knees onto the rocks on the shore. The pain in my bones made my vision go dark. Chloe was still standing in the gazebo. Seeing me crawl off the lake, completely soaked, with a frozen child in my arms, her face finally changed. But it wasn't horror, it was annoyance. "Well, why are you being so dramatic? Kids are resilient. Big deal." She took a little swim. "Shut up." My voice was quiet, but Chloe didn't utter another word. I ran to the parking lot with Sophie and cranked the car's heater to the max. With one hand, I held my child against me. With the other, I dialed 911. Lincoln Park South Lagoon parking lot. A 3-year-old girl fell through the ice. Time in the water unknown. Severe hypothermia. Unconscious. Please, hurry. I beg you, hurry. By the time the ambulance arrived, Sophie's lips had turned from white to gray. When the paramedics moved her onto the stretcher, I heard a sound very quiet, like a kitten squeaking in its sleep. Mommy. Cold. My tears fell onto her face and instantly froze. In the ambulance, I held Sophie's hand. Her fingers were as thin as twigs, her fingernails blue-purple. On her wrist hung the smartwatch I had bought her. The screen was cracked. The digital hands had stopped at 6:14 p.m. That was exactly 2 hours and 4 minutes after Chloe had taken her from the house. The paramedic began active warming procedures. Sophie was wrapped in 3 layers of thermal blankets. The line on the EKG monitor was erratic. I heard the low conversation between the medics. Core body temp is 82 degrees, severe hypothermia. We need to evaluate liver and kidney function immediately. I squeezed Sophie's hand until my knuckles turned white. At the hospital, Sophie was rushed straight to the ICU. The doors closed in front of me. The red light flicked on. The hallway smelled of bleach. Groans echoed from somewhere down the hall. I leaned against the wall and slowly slid down to the freezing floor. My wet clothes clung to my body. I was shaking from the cold, but I didn't feel it. I only felt my heart. It was as if someone's hand was gripping it inside me, twisting it until it bled. My phone rang. Victor, Anna, what the hell are you doing? Chloe called. Said you flew to the lagoon like a madwoman. Your daughter fell through the ice. A 2-second pause hung on the line. Then Victor's voice came back, clearly slurred with alcohol. Under the ice? How did she fall? You let Chloe take her to the lagoon in sub-zero weather, and Chloe stood in the gazebo looking at her phone. Your 3-year-old daughter fell through the ice. When I found her, she was already stiff. Yeah, well, Chloe said she just took her out for a walk. I don't know how long she was in the freezing water. Maybe an hour, maybe 2, maybe more. She's in the ICU right now. Silence again. And then I heard a sentence I will never forget for the rest of my life. Listen, just don't panic yet. Things happen, kids fall, they get bruised. And Chloe didn't do it on purpose. She's a young girl, she doesn't have experience. What was she supposed to do? He was defending Chloe. His daughter's core temperature in the ICU was 82 degrees, and he was defending the woman who abandoned his child in a blizzard. Victor, come to the hospital right now, I can't leave. I'm in negotiations with a major client. You're exaggerating everything. Fine, I'll drop by later. He hung up. I stared at the screen that read, call ended. Later, he said. Later. The red light above the ICU turned off. A doctor came out. His eyes above the surgical mask looked exhausted and grim. Family? I'm her mother. The immediate life-threatening crisis has passed, but due to severe hypothermia, she is experiencing systemic inflammatory response syndrome. Her liver function indicators are extremely poor. There are signs of kidney damage. We need to transfer her to the critical care unit for continuous core rewarming and organ support. Furthermore, the doctor paused. There's a fracture in her right tibia, likely from hitting the edge of the ice when she fell. At 3 years old, her bones are still forming. If not treated properly, it could affect her gait in the future. My nails dug into my palms. We will need imported, specialized orthopedic materials and a consultation with an out-of-network specialist team. It's quite expensive. I will get the admission paperwork started, but you need to arrange payment as soon as possible. How much? For this initial stage and the specialized surgical protocols, we're looking at about $50,000 out of pocket. Further treatment depends on her progress. $50,000. How much money was in my joint account with Victor? Last month it was around $75,000. I hadn't worked in 3 years. That money was Victor's salary and bonuses. I dialed his number. He didn't pick up. I dialed again. Still no answer. On the 3rd try, he answered. What now? They are transferring Sophie to critical care. The first stage of treatment requires $50,000. Transfer it to my account. $50,000? His voice cracked into a yell. To cure a kid's cold costs $50,000? It's not a cold. It's organ damage from hypothermia and a fractured bone. There's no way it costs $50K. The hospital is scamming you, Anna. Stop demanding money for every little thing. Do you even know how tight money is for me right now? Last week, I had to invest a portion of it into a corporate project. Last week, you bought Chloe a $10,000 designer bag. Silence fell over the line. Who told you that? Have you been checking the bank statements? You bought it for her from our joint account. It's for business. She needs to look presentable when she represents the company to clients. I need $50,000 right now. Are you going to transfer it or not? He stayed silent. I heard Chloe's voice through the phone, sickly sweet, as if the smell of her cheap perfume was oozing through the speaker. Vic, who is it? Come back. Mr. Davis is waiting for you to make a toast. Then Victor's voice dropped lower, likely covering the microphone with his hand. Chloe giggled. Anna, ask the hospital if you can set up a payment plan. I'll see what I can do in a few days. He hung up. Above the doors to the critical care unit, a cold white light buzzed. Through the glass, I could see Sophie. She lay under a bear hugger warming blanket, tubes in her nose, an IV in her wrist. A piece of medical tape was stuck to the back of her hand. Her little hand was so small that even the thinnest needle made her whole wrist swell. The EKG monitor beeped. Every beep sounded like a countdown. I stood outside the glass, pressing my forehead against it. The glass was cold. My clothes were still soaking wet. Melted water from my hair dripped down my neck. The hospital vents blew warm air, but it only made me shiver more violently. A passing nurse looked at me and brought me a blanket. Mom, you need to think about yourself too. Thank you. I took the blanket, but I didn't wrap it around myself. I neatly folded it, placed it on a chair, and continued watching my daughter through the glass. Victor arrived at 1:00 a.m. Wearing an expensive suit, his tie loosened. He reeked of alcohol and someone else's perfume. He walked with an unsteady gait, leaned against the wall, and burped. Where is she? I pointed to the glass. He craned his neck, took a look, and frowned. So many tubes. Hypothermia, organ damage, a fracture. And what did this doctor say? $50,000 for the first stage? He frowned again, shoved his hands into his suit pockets, and shook his head, as if he had just hit a snag in a complex business deal. Anna, listen to me. 50 grand is no joke. I'm dealing with a cash flow gap in my project right now. 2 months ago, you bought Chloe a new car. That's a company car. I know. And that secondary credit card you gave her last month with a $10,000 limit? She blew $7,000 of it in a week. That was for business expenses too. His face changed. It wasn't guilt. It was the rage of a liar who had been caught. What are you getting at? Are you spying on me? Your daughter is in the ICU and you're interrogating me? He poked me in the chest with a finger trembling from alcohol. All you do is dig into the past, checking statements. It's no wonder He didn't finish, but I knew what he wanted to say. It's no wonder I don't want to come home. I looked at him, at this man, the man who had shielded me from the rain with his umbrella 3 years ago, the man who stood at our wedding and promised to take care of me for the rest of my life, the man who sobbed uncontrollably outside the delivery room when Sophie was born. Now, he stood outside his daughter's ICU room, reeking of another woman's perfume, haggling with me over the money to save her life. $50,000 by tomorrow morning, I said. Otherwise, you can explain to the doctors yourself why they have to stop giving her medication. He stared at me for a few seconds, then clicked his tongue as if swatting away an annoying fly. Fine, I'll transfer it tomorrow. As he turned to leave, his phone screen lit up. A notification from iMessage popped up, a heart emoji, and the text, Vic, are you coming soon? I'm waiting for you. The contact was saved as Chloe is less than 3. Taking 3 steps away, he answered the call. His voice instantly softened by 8 octaves. Yeah, I'm here. It's nothing serious. I'll be there soon. His back disappeared around the corner of the hallway. The click of his dress shoes faded away. Inside the room, the EKG monitor kept beeping. The rhythm was unstable. I sat on the plastic chair, the folded blanket on my lap. I clutched my phone in my hand. The screen still showed our joint banking app. Balance. $62. The money had been there just hours ago, but Victor claimed he had a cash flow gap. 2 weeks ago, he had bought a limited edition Rolex for $8,000. The shipping address wasn't our home, it was his office, and he paid for it from our joint account. I hadn't been tracking him. The automated transaction text just popped up on my phone. The next morning at 7:00 a.m. I called Victor. No answer. At 8:00 a.m. No answer. At 9:00 a.m. The head nurse approached me. Her voice was polite but direct. Mrs. Davis, the invoice for the imported medications needs to be paid today. Otherwise, we will have to switch her to standard, covered alternatives. Their efficacy is lower, and it could negatively impact her organ recovery. I will pay everything today. At 10:00 a.m., I called for the 6th time. He answered. The background was quiet, unlike the banquet last night. He was probably at home. Don't rush me about the money. I'll talk to accounting this morning. There was money in the joint account. Transfer $50,000 to the hospital. I told you I'm handling it. Victor, are you transferring it or not? He went silent for a few seconds, then his tone shifted. It was that familiar annoyance mixed with arrogant indifference. Anna, can you think big picture for once? I need that capital next week. As soon as the project closes, I'll give Sophie everything she needs. Let them use the standard meds for now. Nothing terrible is going to happen. Your daughter is in the ICU with a broken leg and failing kidneys, and you're telling me nothing terrible? Stop making a mountain out of a molehill. Kids heal fast. She'll recover fine on normal meds. You think you're the only one who cares about her? I care too, but I am the one bringing in the money. You don't bring a single cent into this house, you just open your mouth and make demands. I hung up. I opened the banking app, trying to transfer whatever I could from his other accounts. Incorrect password. He had changed the password. I sat on the chair outside the ICU, staring at the screen with the red text. Incorrect password. Please try again. From the end of the hallway came the clatter of a medical cart rolling over the tiles. My phone rang again. Not Victor Chloe, I answered. Anna. Her voice was breezy. Every word was stretched out with a mocking lilt. I feel so awkward about yesterday. I couldn't have imagined Sophie would just run off to the lake by herself. Kids, you know? You just can't keep an eye on them all the time. But listen, here's the thing. Mister. Victor asked me to pass along a message about the hospital bill. Don't make a fuss right now. He's really strapped for cash at the moment. Maybe you can just negotiate with the hospital to wait? Chloe, I said calmly. You took my 3-year-old daughter out in below-zero weather and abandoned her by a frozen lagoon. She fell through the ice and almost died. And now you're calling me to relay a message from my husband telling me not to make a fuss? A brief pause hung on the line. Then Chloe laughed. The laugh wasn't loud, but I could clearly hear the message behind it. And what are you going to do about it, Anna? Well, why are you being like this? Out of the goodness of my heart, I took Sophie for a walk, and instead of saying thank you, you accuse me. Besides, Mr. Victor himself said the kid needs to be toughened up. You're raising her like a greenhouse plant. How is she ever going to achieve anything in life? She paused, soaking in the effect of her words. Oh, right, Anna, you probably don't know. Mr. Victor came back yesterday and told me that lately you haven't been yourself, always paranoid. He asked me to help calm you down. Don't be so sensitive. Business is hard on men. You have to learn to be accommodating. I stayed silent. Chloe giggled again. Anyway, Anna, I have to get back to work. Don't worry about Sophie. Kids bounce back. She'll be fine in a few days. Bye-bye. Call ended. My hand gripping the phone trembled, not from sadness, but from the sudden realization that in Victor and Chloe's world, my daughter nearly dying wasn't a tragedy. It was a minor inconvenience. An inconvenience where I was expected to be accommodating and not be paranoid. My motherly tears, my terror, my broken heart to them, it was just hysterics. A frantic alarm blared from the ICU monitor, followed by the nurse call bell and the sound of running feet. I jumped up and rushed to the glass. Sophie's body was convulsing weakly under the thermal blanket. One nurse was adjusting the IV, another was staring at the vitals. Their faces were tense. The attending physician ran in, glanced at the screen, and yelled something to the nurses. I couldn't hear anything through the glass. I could only watch my daughter seizing on a hospital bed that was entirely too big for her tiny hands unconsciously clenching and unclenching, the line on the monitor jumping like a terrified snake. 3 minutes later, the seizure stopped. The doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask. A spasm triggered by multiple organ failure. We've stabilized her for now, but if we don't immediately start the imported protocols to control the inflammation, her liver function will continue to plummet. And then, he didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. I will pay everything right now. My voice was absolutely steady. I turned and walked to the restroom at the end of the hall and locked the door. The fluorescent light buzzed. A harsh white glare fell on the mirror. The woman in the mirror stood there with half-dry hair plastered to her face. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her lips were chapped. Her parka was still covered in dried, grayish-white mud from the lagoon. I stared at her for a long time, then crouched down. From a hidden compartment inside my right boot, I pulled out a small object, slightly larger than a fingernail. It was a matte black material, no logos, just a razor-thin slot on the side. I dug my nail into it and pulled. Click. It opened to reveal the inside. An emergency microtransmitter, not a phone. No screen, no keyboard, just a single button and a microphone the size of a pinhole. This item was a duplicate of the device locked in my jewelry box 3 years ago. I had locked that one away myself. But I had sewn this one into the lining of my boot not because I foresaw Victor's betrayal, but because on my wedding day my father had told me one final thing. Aina, I won't stop you. But remember this. If the sky ever falls, the road home is always open to you. I pressed the button with my thumb. 3 seconds later, a voice came through the tiny speaker. A deep, commanding, calm voice of a man accustomed to standing at the top of the world. Anna. I opened my mouth, but my voice broke for a second. I exhaled quietly. You've never contacted me. Tell me what happened. I slowly slid down the tiled wall and sat on the floor. Sophie. My voice finally trembled. For the first time in 3 years, Sophie is dying. Silence fell over the transmitter. 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds lasted longer than the minutes I spent lying on the ice. Then my father's voice spoke again. His tone hadn't changed. It held the same terrifying, icy restraint. But I could hear what was hiding beneath it, like magma boiling beneath the Earth's crust. Who did this? It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Her husband's secretary took Sophie to the Lincoln Park Lagoon in sub-zero weather and left her by the ice. Sophie fell through. When I found her, she was already freezing. She's in the ICU now. Organ failure. A broken leg. I pronounced every word slowly and clearly. I knew the man on the other end needed exact data. He didn't need my tears. Does the hospital need money? Or people? Or both? They don't have the right medications. Victor changed the password to our joint account and refuses to pay. Which hospital? Chicago Memorial, downtown. 20 minutes. The connection severed. I sat on the bathroom floor, the back of my head resting against the freezing wall. The light buzzed, the faucet leaked, drops echoing loudly as they hit the sink. 20 minutes. My father said 20 minutes. From his estate in New York to Chicago, it's about 700 miles in a straight line. What did those 20 minutes mean? I didn't think about it. 3 years of no contact, but there are things that don't fade with time. I stood up, splashed ice-cold water on my face, dried off with a paper towel, and hid the transmitter back in my boot. When I walked out of the restroom, Victor was standing in the hallway. He had changed into a sharp, smart casual outfit, combed his hair, and looked fresh and awake. He was holding a takeout bag from a high-end steakhouse in River North. Here, I brought you some food. He held out the bag with the expression of a man reveling in his own benevolence. Look at me, doing what a good husband should do. I lost my temper yesterday. Don't hold it against me. I didn't take the bag. Where is the money? His face hardened, but he quickly reeled it in, grabbed my sleeve, and hissed. Keep your voice down. We're in a hospital. I'm handling it. I told my finance guys to clear the funds this morning. You changed the password to the account. It's an automated bank security update. I haven't had time to reset it yet. Victor, look me in the eyes. His gaze twitched. I knew that tell all too well. In the second year of our marriage, when he came home at 2:00 a.m. with lipstick on his collar, his eyes darted exactly like that. Back then, I chose to believe him. Not today. What password? Can you stop pressuring me about money? I told you I'm handling it. Your daughter just had a seizure. The doctor said without the imported medications, her liver function will continue to fail. What exactly are you handling? You've been handling it for 12 hours. What have you accomplished? His face turned purple, not from shame, but because his mask was being ripped off in public. Anna, enough. He raised his voice, then quickly looked around and hissed again. Do you think money grows on trees? I am single-handedly carrying this family. You, the kid, and I still have to maintain my corporate network. Do you think this is easy for me? You sit on your ass at home and all you do is make demands. Give me the $50,000. Most of the money in that account was my savings from before we got married. He froze. When I married you, I transferred all my savings into our joint account. Did you forget? He stayed silent, but his jaw muscle twitched. It was a sign his patience was gone. For the last time. What is the password? Oh, you want to make a scene? He took a step back, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked down at me. Fine. You want the money? You'll get it. But first, you're going to do one thing. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded stack of papers. A printed document. The margins bore the watermark of a corporate law firm. Sign this, and the money will be cleared instantly. I took the papers. The header read, Settlement Agreement and Waiver of Liability. The essence of the text. I acknowledge Sophie's injury as an accident unrelated to third parties. I voluntarily waive the right to pursue civil or criminal charges against any involved parties. I commit to non-disclosure to the media regarding the involved parties. He was too afraid to even put Chloe's name in print. I flipped to the last page. It already bore the blue stamp of a notary and the law firm. All it needed was my signature. Victor. When did you have time to draft this? That's none of your business. Sophie was brought into the ICU at 8:00 p.m. You showed up at 1:00 a.m., stayed for 10 minutes, and left. It is now 10:00 a.m. the next day. I looked up at him. When you left the hospital, you didn't go home. You went to your lawyers. While your daughter's life hung by a thread, you sat in a lawyer's office drumming up this piece of paper. Then you went home, slept, styled your hair, and bought food from an expensive restaurant to play the part of a caring husband. And now you're using our daughter's life to barter with me. Sign it, and you'll give me the money to save her. A nurse walked by, slowing her pace and glancing at us sideways. Victor noticed. He instantly shifted his tone to something sweet, playing the patient husband trying to calm down his hysterical wife. Annie, calm down. This is for our own protection. What if someone tries to blow this up into a scandal? It's protection for you and for Chloe. I'm protecting our family. This family? I lifted the papers right in front of his face and slowly ripped them in half. The sound of tearing paper in the quiet hallway echoed like a gunshot. The shredded pieces fell onto his perfectly polished leather shoes. You! He lunged forward and raised his hand to strike me. I didn't flinch. His hand froze in midair, balled into a fist, and slowly lowered. Not out of conscience, but because a hospital security guard was standing just around the corner. He bent down, picked up the largest torn piece with the blue stamp, and crushed it in his fist. His face held no more fake affection, only raw, naked hatred. Anna, you ungrateful bitch, he hissed through his teeth. You've been living off me for 3 years. Your resume is a blank page. Without me, you are nobody. Who do you think you are to dictate terms to me? He stepped close, his chest almost touching mine. I smelled his cologne. Not the one I bought him. I'll repeat this one last time. Sign it, and I give you the money. Don't sign it, and you won't get a single dime. Go complain to whoever you want. Let's see who a judge believes, an unemployed housewife, or the vice president of a private equity firm. He turned on his heel and walked away. The clack of his shoes faded, the elevator chimed. The hallway fell silent again, broken only by the beep of the monitor from the ICU. I bent down, gathered all the torn pieces from the floor, neatly folded them, and put them in my pocket. Not as a souvenir, as evidence. At 11, 3:00 a.m., I went to the billing department and used my only personal credit card to swipe $1,000. It was my entire limit. That money would cover Sophie's absolute basic care for maybe 12 hours. 12 hours. Time was running out. At 1:30 p.m., the attending doctor approached me again. Mrs. Davis, her liver function is still dropping. I need your final consent to begin the imported protocols. If we stick to the standard ones, I cannot guarantee she won't suffer irreversible damage. I will have the payment sorted today. Start the advanced protocols. I can't without clearance. The doctor looked at me, gave a grim nod, and walked away. At 2:30 p.m., I sat in the hallway looking at my phone contacts. 3 years with no communication. 3 years ago, I deleted every contact connected to Anastasia Sterling. I thought I could become Anna, Victor's wife, a normal mother. I thought love was worth giving up everything. My phone vibrated. A WhatsApp message from Victor. Not a money transfer. Just text. Anna, I've been thinking. You're right. I should have kept a closer eye on Sophie, but you have to understand my position too. Let's do this. We'll put the settlement agreement on hold for now, but you have to promise you won't check my accounts anymore. Tonight, I'll send Chloe over. She'll bring you $10,000 in cash to cover the immediate costs. He was sending Chloe, the very woman who nearly murdered my daughter, coming to toss me a handout like a stray dog. I didn't reply. At 3:00 p.m., the heavy fire doors at the end of the hallway swung open. No, they didn't swing open. They were kicked open. The metal doors slammed against the walls with a sound that echoed down the floor 3 times. I looked up. First to enter were 4 men. Black tactical jackets, black cargo pants, combat boots, earpieces. The way they scanned the hallway meant they were clearing the perimeter. They didn't stop. 2 moved to the far ends of the corridor. 2 stood at the entrance with their backs to us. Then the second group entered. 6 men in identical gear, but the faint outlines of Kevlar vests were visible under their jackets. They fanned out, securing every exit. The nurses at the station froze. A young nurse instinctively reached for the phone to call the police, but the head nurse grabbed her hand. The head nurse was pale. She had noticed the distinct bulges at the men's waistlines. The last person to walk in was a man. He was in his 60s, but he carried himself as straight as a steel rod. A gray cashmere overcoat hung open over a dark navy turtleneck. His silver hair was swept back impeccably, his face deeply lined, but his jawline looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes were the blackest I had ever seen, like 2 dried-up wells. Drop a stone in, and you'd never hear it hit the bottom. He stopped in the middle of the hallway, swept his gaze over everything, and landed on me. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years. I had lost a lot of weight. My hair was tangled, my eyes swollen, my parka stained with dried, gray mud from the lagoon. He stared at me for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something flickered deep within his eyes, but only for an instant. Anna. I stood up, my legs weak. I had been sitting in that plastic chair for almost 10 hours. Dad. He walked toward me. His pace wasn't fast, but every strike of his shoe against the floor radiated absolute authority, as if announcing the arrival of a supreme power. He stopped in front of me and raised his hand. I thought he was going to stroke my hair like when I was a child. But he didn't. His hand hovered in the air for a second, then landed heavily on my shoulder. His grip was firm, but I could feel his fingers trembling slightly. "Where is the child?" I pointed to the ICU window. He walked up to the glass and looked at Sophie. There were more tubes on her now. The blanket covered her entire body. Only her small face was visible, gray, pale, her lips bloodless, her eyes tightly shut. My father stared for 10 seconds, then turned and threw a single word to the man behind him. "Doctors." The man nodded and spoke quietly into his lapel mic. 7 minutes later, the roar of a helicopter echoed from the hospital roof. 3 minutes after that, 4 people in white coats emerged from the stairwell. They were not from this hospital. Their badges bore the logo of Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Leading them was a silver-haired man in gold-rimmed glasses, with deep dark circles under his eyes. He walked straight up to my father, offering a slight bow. "Mr. Sterling." I reviewed the girl's charts on the helicopter. Well, multiple organ failure, secondary to profound hypothermia. Liver and kidney markers are crashing. Bone fracture. I brought all the necessary equipment and proprietary medications. I need half an hour to establish a sterile zone. Then I will personally assess her and initiate the protocol. If we need anything else, we will handle it on site. Do it. Dr. Harrison and his team swept into the ICU. The head of the local ICU department, Dr. Miller, stood by the nurses' station, rooted to the floor. He stared at the newcomers, then at the dozen men in black, opened his mouth, but made no sound. The head nurse leaned in and whispered in his ear, "Dr. Miller, that's Dr. Harrison, the specialist from Hopkins. The guy who won the Lasker Award for transplant surgery." The local doctor's face changed color several times. My father turned back to me. "Sit. Tell me." We sat in a small waiting area at the end of the hall. The security detail automatically formed an invisible perimeter with a 10-foot radius. No one could get close. I started the story from the moment Chloe took Sophie away. How I crawled across the ice. How I pulled my freezing daughter out. How a drunk Victor arrived, stood around for 10 minutes, and left. How he changed the passwords and demanded I sign a settlement in exchange for the money to save her life. I spoke calmly, as if reading a dry report about someone else's life. But when I got to Chloe's phrase, "kids need to be toughened up," I faltered. Not because I was going to cry, but because my throat felt like it was clamped in a vice. My father didn't rush me. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, and listened. When I finished, the hallway was dead silent for 20 seconds. Has it been like this for 3 years? No. The first year, he came home early, took Sophie to the park. It started in the second year. He began staying late at work. Chloe started coming to our house constantly with reports. I asked him about it. He told me I was being paranoid. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. My father narrowed his eyes. It wasn't a squint of anger. It was the look he had when calculating the mathematics of total destruction. Chloe. Who is she? Normal background. High school education. Her resume said she worked as a receptionist. Then she moved to Victor's company as his secretary. What company? Apex Investment Group. Downtown. He's the vice president. Promoted last year. Apex Investment Group, my father repeated, with the tone of a man reading the serial number of a dead ant. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a thick, dark gray encrypted satellite phone, and pressed one button. Mark. Run Apex Investment Group in Chicago. No rush, but before my granddaughter is discharged, I want all financial flows, shareholders, directors, and personal files of every employee for the last 3 years. He hung up and put the phone away. Dad, I didn't ask you to come here to get revenge. I just need Sophie to survive. I'll handle the rest myself. His face didn't change, but the index finger of his right hand tapped his knee twice. It was his habit when suppressing emotion. I had known it since childhood. Anna, when you married him, do you remember what I told you? That the road home is always open? Yes. Did you hear me clearly? That road isn't just for you. It's for you and your child. You can tolerate being humiliated yourself, but what they did to Sophie is no longer in your jurisdiction. He stood up and adjusted the collar of his cashmere coat. Where does he live? Dad. I knew my father. Sterling Global Holdings meant logistics, ports, real estate, and raw materials all over the world. With that scale of business, the concepts of clean or dirty didn't apply to outsiders. I grew up watching his methods. He wasn't the type to wait for a court order. Dad, Sophie is in the ICU. I don't want to think about anything else until she gets better. We'll deal with it when she's back on her feet. He looked at me for a few seconds. Fine. He turned and walked toward the ICU doors. After 3 steps, he stopped, and without turning around, asked, Will your husband be showing up here today? I don't know. He kept walking. Around 6:00 p.m., Sophie's condition showed positive momentum for the first time. Dr. Harrison's team had spent 4 hours adjusting her medication protocols and hooking her up to portable life support equipment they had flown in. When Dr. Harrison stepped out of the ICU, his forehead was glistening with sweat. Her core temperature is up to 91 degrees. We've halted the decline in liver function. Kidneys are stabilizing. We won't rush the bone fracture. As soon as her overall condition allows, I'll bring in my orthopedic surgeons. Will there be long-term effects? I asked. At this point, if her organ recovery goes smoothly, she will live. The fracture is in a tricky spot, but kids' bones are malleable. If we set it right, she won't walk with a limp. He paused. But there is one thing. The girl was in the freezing water for too long. The peripheral nerve endings have been damaged. The toes on her right foot may permanently lose their sensitivity to cold. In the winter, she will feel the cold much more severely than others. Feel the cold more severely. My 3-year-old daughter, because she lay for an unknown number of hours in an ice hole, would now suffer from the cold every single winter for the rest of her life. Thank you, doctor. Don't thank me. Thank William Sterling. He pulled me away from a family barbecue with one phone call. Dr. Harrison took off his gloves and gave a wry smile. I was in the middle of grilling ribs. At 8:00 p.m., I was sitting in the hallway chewing on a cold bagel. My phone vibrated. Victor, let's meet for lunch tomorrow. We need to talk about everything in person. Before I could lock the screen, a message from Chloe popped up. Anna, Mr. Victor told me to drop off some cash for you. Which hospital are you at? I'll put it in my GPS. She didn't even know which hospital we were in. I didn't reply to either of them. At 9:30 p.m., my father walked out of the doctor's lounge, which he had apparently already commandeered as his personal office. Behind him followed a man in his 30s. Buzz-cut, narrow face, hollow eyes, wearing an unremarkable gray jacket. He stood like a shadow. Anna, this is Marcus. From this minute on, he is with you. Dad, that's not necessary. I wasn't asking. It's an order. From now until this entire mess is over, Marcus will be with you 24 hours a day. If you don't like him breathing down your neck, he'll step back 10 feet. But no further. I looked at Marcus. He gave me an emotionless nod. Fine. My father nodded and returned to the lounge. Before the door closed, I heard him speaking on the phone. Mark, the Apex investment files, are they ready? I didn't go home that night. I pushed some chairs together in the hallway, covered myself with a hospital blanket, and slept outside the ICU. Every hour I got up and looked at Sophie through the glass. At 3:00 a.m., Sophie moved. Her left hand unconsciously gripped the edge of the blanket and immediately let go. The line on the monitor became a little steadier. I pressed my forehead against the glass. The cold seeped through my skin into my bones. Mommy's here, I whispered. The glass muffled the sound. She couldn't hear. Mommy is never leaving. The next morning at 9:00 a.m., Victor arrived. This time, he wasn't alone. Chloe was with him, wearing a baby pink cropped puffer jacket, white sneakers, and perfect makeup, as if she were heading to a photo shoot. In her hands, she carried a paper tray with 2 Starbucks cups. They walked down the hallway. Victor's face was plastered with a rehearsed expression of strained concern. Chloe's face screamed, I'm just here to help out. But as they rounded the corner, they abruptly stopped. Because standing in the hallway were 4 men in black tactical jackets. Victor's step faltered. He looked at them, then at the closed ICU doors, then at me, sitting at the end of the hall. Anna, who are these people? I didn't answer immediately. I sat in my chair, holding a paper cup of warm water that Marcus had brought me at some point. Marcus himself stood 10 feet away by the water cooler, looking like a regular visitor. Hospital security, I answered. Victor clearly didn't believe me. Where on earth did hospital security wear tactical jackets and carry concealed firearms? But he decided not to press the issue. He had another goal. Anna, we need to talk. He leaned down to me, lowering his voice to the tone of a mature man here to solve problems. I thought about it all night. I was wrong. I lost my temper. Forget the settlement agreement. I'll transfer the money today. $50,000. Spend it however you need. He pulled out his phone, opened the banking app, and shoved the screen under my nose. The screen showed the amount of $50,000 and the hospital's routing number. I press send, and the money goes through. But you have to promise me one thing. What? Leave Chloe alone. Yes, she took her eyes off Sophie, but it wasn't malicious. You can see for yourself. She's young. She doesn't know how to handle kids. Victor, I don't need your money anymore. His finger hovered over the screen. His face turned to stone. What do you mean? Sophie's treatment is already paid for. I don't need your handouts. He straightened up and stared at me. Then his eyes darted to the men in black, to the elite medical team bustling behind the glass, to the tightly shut door of the doctor's lounge. Who paid for it? He hissed. Who the fuck paid for it? Did you find someone? You found yourself a sugar daddy? Your daughter is in the ICU, and I set my cup down and stood up, looking him dead in the eyes. You came here, and the first thing you did wasn't ask how she was. The first thing you did was try to bargain and find out who gave me the money. Your secretary is standing 10 feet from the room of the child she almost killed, and you brought her here. You think this is normal? Chloe heard that. Her face twisted, but she quickly forced a smile, walked up, and took Victor's arm. Anna, please don't be like that. I came to apologize. Look, I even brought Sophie a sweet frappuccino, a 3-year-old in the ICU with tubes in her throat, and she brought her a frappuccino. Chloe tightened her grip on Victor's sleeve. Her nails dug into the fabric of his jacket. She smirked that familiar smirk. God, you are such a fool, Anna. I get it, you're stressed, but don't take your anger out on me. I'm a victim here too. I was so scared when she ran off by herself. You were sitting in the gazebo looking at your phone. I was calling for help. The phone records for your number from 4:00 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. show 0 outgoing calls. The last message you sent was at 4:12 p.m. to Victor. Vic, we're here playing. Pick us up when you're done. And you attached a selfie. Chloe's smile slid off her face. Victor slowly began to pale. You hacked her phone? I didn't, I said. But someone did. The hallway became so quiet that you could hear the water bubbling in the heating pipes. The door to the lounge opened. My father walked out. Today he was wearing a black sweater under yesterday's cashmere coat. He was holding a manila folder. He glanced at Victor, then at Chloe hanging off his arm, and then spoke a sentence directed at me. Anna, is this your husband? His tone wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as if confirming the classification of trash before throwing it out. Victor sensed it. He instinctively shook off Chloe's arm and took a half step back. Not out of fear. It was the self-preservation instinct of prey encountering an apex predator. Who are you? Victor's voice wavered. My father didn't grant him a look. He handed the folder to me. The Apex Investment Group documents. Review them. I opened the folder. Apex Investment Group. Operating capital. $50 million. Beneficial owner. Through 3 shell LLCs, Richard Spencer. Spencer has 4 other companies, 3 of which operate at a loss. They are entirely sustained by the cash flow from Apex. Apex's largest client, infrastructure projects for Sterling Construction, and the parent company of Sterling Construction. My finger stopped on the line. Parent company. Sterling Global Holdings. Sterling Construction was the largest and practically the only major client keeping Apex afloat. In other words, Victor's career, his VP title, his arrogance, and his power over me, all of it hung on a single food chain. And at the top of that chain stood my father. And me. I closed the folder. Reviewed? My father asked. What's the play? I looked at the ICU window. Sophie was still in there. The line on the monitor was steadier, but her eyes were still closed. When Sophie wakes up, we'll decide. My father nodded. Before returning to his makeshift office, he walked past Victor. He didn't stop, didn't even look at him, but tossed a sentence to me loud enough for Victor to hear. Anna, from now on, don't let strays near the child's room. Strays. Victor's face turned as white as chalk. Sophie woke up on the 3rd day. At 4:00 a. I was dozing in the chair in the hallway. Marcus suddenly tapped my shoulder. Mrs. Davis. The girl moved. I sprang to the window. Sophie's eyes fluttered open, very slowly, as if it took all her strength just to lift her eyelids. Her lips trembled. There was no sound, but I read her lips. Mommy. I pressed my palms against the glass so hard they turned white. Dr. Harrison's team conducted a 10-minute examination. Half an hour later, he came out to me. The crisis is over. Her organs are regenerating. 48 hours of observation, and she can be moved to a regular room. I said thank you, and only when I heard my own voice did I realize I was crying. Tears were streaming down my face, and I hadn't even noticed when they started. At 9:00 a.m., I was allowed in. Throwing on a sterile gown, I opened the door. Sophie's clear brown eyes were fully open. Her little face was still pale, but her lips had regained a pinkish hue. Seeing me, she tried to smile. "Mommy." This time there was a sound quiet, raspy, like the rustle of a dry leaf. I walked over, crouched down by the bed, and pressed my cheek against her little hand. It was cool, but it wasn't the tomb-like chill of the frozen lake. It was the coolness of a living human with blood flowing through her veins. "Mommy's here, Sophie. Mommy is always with you." Her other hand slowly lifted and touched my hair, lightly like a falling leaf. "Mommy, Sophie isn't cold anymore." She closed her eyes and fell asleep again before her smile could fully form. I sat next to her for a full hour, not moving, just watching her breathe, watching the line on the monitor rise and fall evenly, like a quiet, calm river. Stepping out of the ICU, I saw my father. I didn't know how long he had been standing there. "She's awake?" he asked. "Yes." His index finger tapped his coat pocket twice. "Then it's time to get to work." I knew what he meant. "Dad, I need a week. I'll handle everything myself." He stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he nodded. 1 week. That day, I did 3 things. First, I sent Marcus to the house I shared with Victor to retrieve my documents, Sophie's birth certificate, and that jewelry box. There were no diamonds in the box, only the duplicate transmitter and a few photos. A photo from the day Sophie came home from the hospital, where Victor was holding her, laughing happily. I stared at the photo for 3 seconds, then tossed it back into the box. Second, I contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one from the corporate legal department of my father's empire. Her name was Kate. Young, sharp, spoke fast and to the point. "Miss Sterling, I understand your demands. Divorce, full sole custody, asset division, and criminal charges against Chloe. I need a few things for the evidentiary base. I'll gather the evidence. I'll prepare the filings." "Understood." Third, I sent Victor a text. "Tomorrow evening at our restaurant. We need to talk." He replied instantly. "Okay." 30 seconds later, a second message. "I'm glad you've thought things over. A bad settlement is always better than a nasty court battle. This will be best for everyone." I didn't reply. Before locking the screen, I checked the date. It had been exactly 4 days since Sophie fell through the ice. 4 days ago, I was Anna. Now, I was Anastasia Sterling again. The difference between the two women wasn't the name. The difference was that Anna would cry and beg her husband for money to pay for medical bills, and Anastasia never asked anyone for anything. On the 5th day, Sophie was moved to a regular room. Dr. Harrison personally arranged for a VIP suite. The entire floor was cleared out. Sophie lay there alone. 2 private nurses were stationed at the door around the clock. 2 security guards stood at both ends of the hallway. Sophie was doing much better. She was already speaking in full sentences and eating oatmeal by herself, but her right leg was in a cast. She wasn't allowed to stand up. "And those cold, damaged toes, Doctor." Harrison warned about the symptoms were already showing. When the nurse changed her dressings and touched her pinky toe with a cotton swab, Sophie felt nothing. "Mommy, it doesn't hurt at all," she told me seriously, as if reporting a great discovery. I smiled. "That's good. That means in the winter, Mommy will buy you the warmest, coziest socks." She nodded in satisfaction and clumsily continued to poke at her oatmeal with her left hand. I sat next to her. The sunlight fell on her face, which was looking much rosier. Her hair was tangled. She hadn't washed it in 3 days. "Come here. Let Mommy brush your hair." "Yes, I want pigtails." I took the brush and started carefully untangling her hair. And then, suddenly, she spoke. "Mommy, that lady told me we were going to see the fishes." My hand holding the brush froze. "What lady?" "The one in the red coat. She said there were lots and lots of fishes under the ice, and told Sophie to lie on her tummy and look." I gripped the handle of the brush tighter. "And then what?" Sophie lay down, but I couldn't see any fishes, and the lady said, "Crawl further, go further." And then the ice broke. She paused, thinking. Sophie fell. The water was really cold. Sophie called for the lady, but the lady went away. She spoke so calmly, as if describing a boring game. At 3 years old, she didn't understand what had happened. But I did. Chloe hadn't just taken her eyes off her. She had told a 3-year-old child to crawl out onto the thinnest ice. She stood and watched as the ice cracked, and then she walked away. This wasn't negligence. This was attempted murder. I continued brushing her hair. My hand didn't tremble. I braided 2 pigtails and secured them with pink hair ties. So pretty. Sophie touched the pigtails and laughed. I kissed her forehead. Eat your food and take a nap. Mommy has to run some errands. I'll be right back. Mommy won't go far? No, I'll be sitting right outside the door. She relaxed, obediently lay down, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. I walked out of the room. Bright sunlight flooded the hallway. Outside the window, snow was melting on the roofs of nearby buildings. Water dripped from the eaves. I pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer. Kate, add criminal charges against Chloe. Charge: attempted murder of a minor. We have eyewitness testimony from the victim herself. I'll record a video of her account. And one more thing. Pull all of Chloe's bank statements, assets, and every wire transfer between her and Victor for the last 3 years. Miss Sterling, those kinds of requests usually require a subpoena. I have my own channels. Your job is to make the documents admissible for court. Understood. On the 6th day, at 7:30 p.m., I arrived for dinner with Victor. A high-end steakhouse in River North. Our spot, where we celebrated our anniversaries. The private dining room was warm. Appetizers and a bottle of Chablis were already on the table. Victor had arrived early. He was wearing a dark navy suit, the top buttons of his shirt undone, clearly dressed to impress. He looked calm, confident. Seeing me, he stood up and pulled out my chair. I sat down. He poured me some wine. Try it. Excellent vintage. I didn't touch the glass. His smile held for 2 seconds. Then he interlaced his fingers on the table, striking a pose. Let's talk like adults. Anna. I've thought a lot these past few days. I was definitely wrong about the situation with Sophie. It's my fault. I shouldn't have trusted Chloe. I take responsibility. His voice sounded so sincere it was as if he had rehearsed it 30 times in front of a mirror. But the worst is behind us. Sophie is recovering. We need to move forward for the sake of our family. He reached out and tried to cover my hand with his. But the moment his fingers brushed my skin, I pulled my hand away. His hand hung in the air. Then he calmly pulled it back and took a sip of wine. You're still angry. I don't want to fight, Anna. Victor, I came here to tell you 3 things. First, divorce. He set his glass down. His face didn't change, only his eyebrow twitched slightly. Are you serious? Have I ever joked with you? He stared at me for 5 seconds, and then he laughed. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms expansively. Anna, you're emotional because of Sophie. I get it, but use your head. What divorce? You haven't worked in 3 years. You have no income, no recent work history. What are you going to live on? How are you going to support a kid? Second, I continued, completely ignoring his words. I am taking full, sole custody of Sophie. That's just delusional. He sat up straight. Why would a court give you that? You have no financial foundation and no property. A judge looks at income, not at who cries the loudest. Third, Chloe is going to prison. Victor's face finally changed. Not gradually, but in a single second, as if a door had been thrown open to reveal the monster behind it. You. He leaned forward, dropping his voice. Are you out of your fucking mind? You're going to the cops? The lawsuit is already being drafted. Anna. He slammed his fist on the table. The appetizer plates rattled. Do you even realize what you're doing? Chloe is an employee of my company. You sue her, you drag my reputation through the mud. Your reputation is more important than your daughter's life? Don't twist my words! He sprang to his feet, breathing heavily. The veins in his neck bulged. Listen to me very carefully. 1. There will be no divorce. 2. You are not touching Chloe. Believe me, I make one phone call, and you won't find a single lawyer in this city willing to take your case. I sat in my chair, looking up at him. He loomed over me with the face of a man entirely convinced of his absolute power. Haughty, arrogant, certain that I was nothing. Victor, I said calmly, do you know who the biggest client of Apex Investment Group is? He froze. Sterling Construction. 70% of your firm's revenue comes from their infrastructure projects. You only made vice president last year because you managed to sign that $10 million contract with Sterling Construction. Am I right? His anger was replaced by confusion. How do you know all this? And the parent company of Sterling Construction is called Sterling Global Holdings. Have you heard the name? Of course he had. There wasn't a single person in the American business world who hadn't heard of Sterling Global. A Fortune 100 empire. Logistics, mining, mega, infrastructure projects. Half the new developments on the north side of Chicago were funded by their money. I know about Sterling Global. So what? What does that have to do with you? I didn't answer. I reached into my purse, pulled out a small object, and placed it on the table. A matte black business card. No flashy design. In the top left corner, a minimalist logo of two intersecting lines. The Sterling family crest. In the center of the card, just two words. Anastasia Sterling. No job title, no phone number, no email. In the hierarchy of that empire, business cards without titles were held only by members of the family. Victor picked up the card. 5 seconds. 10, 15. He stared at the letters, then raised his eyes to me. His pupils contracted. This was no longer anger. It was primal fear, like a rat that realizes the cage door is open, but a tiger is sitting right outside. Your last name, Sterling. My real name, Anastasia Sterling. Anna Davis is a fabricated identity. I took it 3 years ago when I married you. That's impossible. He shook his head, starting to babble. Impossible. You're normal. Your parents. You told me you grew up in foster care. Every word I said about my family was a lie. Silence filled the private room. The only sound was the muffled laughter and clinking of glasses from the main dining room. Victor's hand, holding the card, began to tremble violently. You lied to me for 3 years. I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you the truth. There's a difference. He slammed the card onto the table. You've been playing me from the very beginning. You, Victor. My voice was quiet, but he shut up instantly. Now I am telling you the truth. And you are going to listen very carefully. I stood up. We were almost the same height. I was wearing flats, but in that moment, he looked like a pathetic dwarf. The divorce papers will be delivered to your office by my lawyer. You have 3 days to sign them. You sign and I won't touch your precious Apex investment group. You don't sign. I picked up the business card and dropped it back into my bag. If you don't sign, then on Monday when you walk into work, you'll find out that Sterling Construction has terminated all its contracts. I turned toward the door. Anastasia, he yelled after me. His voice was a mix of panic, rage, and the humiliation of being played. You think you can throw a piece of cardboard at me and I'll buy it? Where's the proof? I didn't bother turning around. When I opened the door, Marcus was standing outside, flanked by 2 other men in black suits. They had materialized silently, but when Victor saw them through the crack in the door, he froze in his tracks. I walked out of the restaurant. It had stopped snowing, the sky was clear, and the stars were visible. Marcus followed silently, 3 paces behind. Marcus, what is Victor going to do next? If he's smart, he'll call his contacts and check the corporate registries to verify your identity. And if he's stupid? He's not stupid, Marcus replied. But first, he'll run to Chloe. Put people on her. I need to know his every move. Yes, ma'am. I sat in the back seat of the car, watching the lights of the city blur past. Lights in windows, other people's lives. My phone lit up. Victor, explain this to me properly. Give me a minute. If you don't come home tonight, you're going to regret it. 3 minutes later. Anna, you forced my hand. I didn't reply. I flipped the phone face down and closed my eyes. Victor's distorted face flashed in my mind, but then I heard Sophie's words. The lady said, crawl further, go further. Chloe hadn't just looked away. She intentionally sent a child onto thin ice, stood and watched it break, and then walked back to the gazebo to send Victor a selfie saying, we're playing. I started to shake. Not from the cold, and not from fear, but from something primal, boiling in my very bones, pulsing in my temples. Marcus. Tomorrow, send people to get all the security footage from the Lincoln Park Lagoon. The parking lot, the paths, everything. If the Parks Department pushes back, drop the Sterling name. If that doesn't work, tell my father's people. Understood. On the 7th day, Victor didn't contact me, but Marcus reported his every move. After leaving the restaurant, Victor drove to Chloe's apartment, stayed for 40 minutes. Then he went to his office. He made 7 phone calls, 3 to his boss, Richard Spencer, 2 to a college buddy at the Chamber of Commerce. We couldn't trace the other 2 numbers. This morning, he took the day off and went to the state registry office, requesting corporate filings for Sterling Global Holdings. He was checking to see if you were lying. At 3:00 p.m., Kate, your lawyer, messaged. The evidentiary base is secure. Security footage, the child's statement, medical records, phone billing records. We are ready to file. I texted her back. Wait for my signal. At 5:00 p.m., Marcus continued. Victor verified your identity through the registries and his business contacts. After that, he dragged his boss, Spencer, into a meeting. Tried to use him to get to the executives at Sterling Global to bypass you and make a deal directly. Spencer called our corporate headquarters. Your father's secretary answered and said he didn't know any Victor Davis. Spencer was terrified and fired Victor on the spot. I nodded. And one more thing. Marcus's voice grew harder. He requested an emergency liquidation from his accounts. $100,000. This afternoon, that money dropped into Chloe's bank account. Chloe immediately broke her lease and bought a one-way ticket to Dubai for the day after tomorrow. 10美元. When Sophie was dying, he didn't have $50,000 to save her. But now he miraculously found $100,000 for Chloe. He finally believed who I was. And his first reaction wasn't repentance. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't falling to his knees begging for forgiveness. His first reaction was to hide the witness, destroy the evidence, and send his mistress out of the country. If she fled to the Emirates, U.S. law enforcement couldn't touch her, and my case against him would fall apart. He thought that without Chloe, I couldn't pin him to the wall. This was the man I had been married to for 3 years. Flight is the day after tomorrow? Yes. The 10:00 a.m. Emirates flight out of O'Hare. We have time, I said. Tell Kate. Tomorrow morning, we file everything. The criminal complaint, the civil suits, the divorce. And immediately file an emergency injunction to revoke Chloe's passport and place her on the no-fly list. Yes, ma'am. I walked over to the window of the hospital room. The lights of the downtown skyline flickered in the distance. In one of those buildings, Victor was probably racking his brain right now, trying to figure a way out. He thought that even a woman with the last name Sterling was just throwing a tantrum. He thought that for the sake of preserving the family, I would eventually back down. For 3 years, I tolerated everything for the sake of this family. He thought I was still the same Anna. Tomorrow, he would find out that Anna was dead. On the 8th day, at 7:00 a.m., my lawyer Kate filed the massive stack of documents at the Cook County Courthouse. The divorce papers, the emergency injunction, and the evidence package handed over to the state's attorney for attempted murder charges. At 9:40 a.m., the federal no-fly order for Chloe went into effect. At 10:00 a.m., Marcus reported that Chloe was sitting in her apartment, packing suitcases. At 11:00 a.m., Victor called me for the first time. I answered, Anastasia. What the fuck are you doing? His voice cracked like a violently over-tightened string. You actually filed? You went to the cops? Yes. Why? Divorce, custody, prison for Chloe. I gave you 3 days. Today is the last day. He breathed heavily into the phone. There was a sound of shattering glass. You forced me to do this! He screamed. You think just because your daddy is a billionaire, I'm scared of you? I'm not a nobody. He hung up. At 1:30 p.m., Marcus reported, Victor went to a private club on the south side. The owner is Mickey Sullivan, a local heavy involved in racketeering and extortion. Victor lived in the same dorm as Mickey's younger brother in college and kept the connection. He went to hire muscle. Victor's lawyer called, Marcus added, offering a settlement, $500,000. If we refuse, they're threatening to leak to the press that you committed fraud by hiding your identity and lying to your husband. Let them leak it. At 6:00 p.m., Sophie ate dinner and asked me to read her a story. I sat on the edge of the bed and read a book about a little bunny trying to find its way home. Mommy, when are we going home? She asked. To our old house? I looked into her clear eyes. We're going to a new house. A big, beautiful house with a huge garden, swings, and lots of bunnies. She smiled happily, rolled onto her side, and fell asleep. I walked out of the room. Marcus was standing by the wall. Mickey Sullivan is on the move. 5 SUVs, about 15 guys. Headed this way. Victor is with them. I checked my watch. 6:35 p.m. Where's my father? Mr. Sterling left the hotel 15 minutes ago. He asked me to pass along a message. The week is up. The week. Exactly 7 days since Sophie woke up. My father had given me a week to play my own games. Time was up. At 7:08 p.m., Victor arrived. They didn't come through the main entrance. 5 black SUVs parked by the loading dock. 15 heavily built guys in leather jackets came up the emergency stairwell. Leading them was a bald, thick-set man with a gold chain as thick as a finger, Mickey Sullivan. Victor walked behind him, pale, but with a desperate, frantic glint in his eyes. They reached the 3rd floor and froze. There were people in the hallway. Not 2, not 4. 12 men in black tactical gear formed 2 solid lines along the walls. Not a word, not a movement, but their posture spoke volumes. Perfect spacing, weight shifted to the balls of their feet, ready for instantaneous, lethal violence. Mickey Sullivan slowed his pace. His guys instinctively reached for their waistbands, but found empty holsters. Mickey had told them to leave the guns in the cars. He thought they were just going to intimidate some rich housewife. I stood at the end of the hallway, outside Sophie's door. Marcus was a step behind me. "Victor," I said, "have you come to check on your daughter?" He took a step forward, trying to push past Mickey, but 2 black-clad guards silently closed ranks in front of him. "Let me through. That's my daughter's room." Mickey Sullivan scanned the security detail and licked his dry lips. He was a gangster with 20 years on the street, but the instincts of a wolf flawlessly recognized the scent of an apex predator. These weren't street thugs. This was top-tier, private military elite. "Little lady," Mickey forced a smile. "Victor Hirthulton here asked us to." He didn't finish. The elevator doors at the far end of the hallway chimed and opened. My father stepped out, wearing his long black overcoat over a dark turtleneck. 2 personal bodyguards walked in lockstep with him. As he moved down the hallway, the 12 guards in black synchronized a single step backward, clearing a path right down the center for him. Mickey Sullivan turned around. At first, he didn't recognize him, but one of his lieutenants, an older ex-con, yanked Mickey's sleeve and whispered something in his ear. In 3 seconds, Mickey's face went from a forced smile to deathly pale. In the Chicago underworld, there are names you don't say out loud. Not out of fear of a hit, but because it's a different level of evolution entirely. Sterling Global owned the shipping yards Mickey's contraband moved through. Sterling owned the logistics, the ports, the politicians. If William Sterling sneezed, Mickey's entire enterprise would be blown away like dust. "Mr. Sterling," Mickey mumbled. The gold chain on his neck shook. He took a step back. My father didn't look at him. He walked straight up to Victor. Victor finally realized exactly what the name on that black business card meant. His legs gave out. "You're Victor?" It wasn't a question. "My granddaughter lay in freezing water and you said kids need to be toughened up. My daughter begged you for money to save her life, and you tried to extort a legal waiver out of her. I gave you a week to apologize, and you dragged a bunch of street thugs to my granddaughter's hospital room. Did I get all of that right?" Victor's knees buckled completely. He would have collapsed to the floor if he hadn't grabbed the wall. "Mr. Sterling, there's a misunderstanding." My father glanced briefly at Mickey Sullivan. One look was enough. Mickey dropped to his knees with a thud. Behind him, his entire crew clattered to the hospital tiles. 15 massive thugs kneeling in the ICU hallway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I didn't know this was your family. This idiot dragged me into this. We're gone." Mickey Sullivan and his crew scrambled up, tripping over each other, and sprinted for the fire stairs. 15 seconds later, the hallway was empty, leaving only us and Victor. Victor stood alone in the middle of the corridor. "There's no going back, Mr. Sterling," his voice grew hoarse. Tears of sheer terror rolled down his cheeks. "I'll sign the divorce. Give her custody. I won't protect Chloe. I beg you." "Your wife gave you 3 days," my father said calmly. "You refused." He nodded. 2 of the guards stepped forward and grabbed Victor by the arms. "Wait. Where are you taking me?" "Anna. Anastasia, tell them." "Anna, for Sophie's sake." I stood by the door to the room looking at this man. The man who handed me an umbrella 3 years ago. The man who promised to love me forever. Victor, I said. The toes on your daughter's right foot can no longer feel the cold. Because she was in the freezing water for too long. She is 3 years old. And she used to call you Daddy. Anna, for Sophie. It is exactly for Sophie, I replied. I turned around, walked into the room, and shut the door tight. In the hallway, the sound of dragging feet echoed, followed by muffled screams and pleas that grew fainter and fainter, until they vanished entirely down the stairwell. I found out what happened next from Marcus. Victor was taken to an abandoned commercial meat freezer on the outskirts of the city, owned by my father's logistics company. In the center of the empty, steel-lined room, they bolted an iron chair to the floor. They sat Victor in it, and drove industrial nails through his wrists and ankles, pinning him to the armrests and legs. He screamed for a long time. And then they closed the heavy, airtight door and dropped the temperature to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Exactly the temperature it had been that night at the Lincoln Park Lagoon. You said kids need to be toughened up, my father said through the small viewing window in the steel door. Well, toughen up. Chloe never made her flight. That morning, federal marshals and local police kicked down the door of her apartment and arrested her. The security cameras at the Lincoln Park Lagoon had caught everything. How she led Sophie to the water, how she pointed at the ice, how she stood and watched the ice crack, how she took 3 steps back, waited 10 seconds, and walked away. In the interrogation room, she sobbed hysterically. She screamed that Victor forced her to do it, that he told her just to scare the kid. But cameras don't lie. Attempted murder of a minor with extreme depravity. She was sentenced to 4.5 years in state prison. On the day the verdict was read, I didn't go to court. I sat in the hospital room, teaching Sophie how to draw our new house. She drew a crooked little house, a tree, and 2 stick figures holding hands. That was Mommy and Sophie. What about Daddy? I asked gently. She thought for a moment, shook her head. I don't want to draw Daddy. On the day Sophie was discharged, the sun was shining brightly over Chicago. It was February. The snow had begun to melt, leaving gleaming puddles on the asphalt. I carried Sophie in my arms. There was a lightweight walking brace on her right leg, but she was laughing, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. My father's car was waiting at the entrance. He stood by the door. Seeing Sophie, his granite face finally cracked, the corners of his mouth lifted by a millimeter. Grandpa! Sophie reached her little arms out to him. He took her in his arms. Clumsily, like a man who moves billions of dollars on the stock exchange, but has no idea how to hold a 3-year-old girl. Grandpa, Mommy said there will be bunnies at the new house. How many? 10? No. 20. Sophie clapped her hands in delight. I stood and watched them. The sunlight caught the silver in my father's hair and the brown of my daughter's pigtails. My phone chimed with a message from Kate. Divorce finalized. Full custody granted. Victor's remaining assets seized. Chloe got 4.5 years. I locked the screen, let's go home. The car pulled away. I took one last look in the rearview mirror at the hospital building. In my arms, Sophie twisted a button on my coat and hummed quietly. Mommy, is it a long drive to the new house? I kissed the top of her head. No, sweetie. It's very close. Outside the window, winter was finally coming to an end.